Zenless Zone Zero is a bombastic, high-energy combat experience full of personality and style, and that's probably why you're here. I mean, who could resist the allure of blasting faceless alien monsters in the most ridiculous way possible? Now, in my experience, games like these tend to have pretty simple and inconsequential stories in order to create cool combat scenarios. But that's not quite the case for Zenless Zone Zero. In fact, I'm gonna argue that this game has the best writing out of any Hoyoverse game thus far. Although I admit sometimes the terminology and subtle nods of foreshadowing get lost in the spectacle of it all, and that's why I put together this video. Consider it a spoiler-free lore guide to help you ease into the story, which is definitely worth paying attention to. And as a bonus, I've also included some speculations about future plot points towards the end that'll help illustrate how the potential mysteries of the Hollow disaster might unfold, and some things to look out for. This game releases July 4th, 2024, so if you're watching this before it comes out, you can use the link in the description to pre-register. This is gonna be really fun, so grab a seat and get comfy. The lore begins in 3, 2, 1. Let's start with the basics. Zenless Zone Zero takes place on a planet plagued by a supernatural phenomenon known as the Hollow disaster. The arrival of the Hollows brought about an apocalyptic event that swallowed cities whole and nearly destroyed the entire world. The most recent and devastating disaster occurred about 10-ish years ago when the Hollow Zero, the largest of all the Hollows, swallowed the old capital city of Eridu. At this point, humanity was on the brink of extinction, but a group of people that I'm just gonna call the Founders made a breakthrough in our understanding of the Hollows. They found a way to not only prevent the Hollows from perpetually expanding, but they also figured out how to extract a unique resource from them that could be turned into a power source. This knowledge allowed them to establish the city of New Eridu, which is where the game takes place. New Eridu is the last known livable city on the entire planet, and it's home to humans, sentient robots, and Therians, who are organic life forms that don't identify as human, like Nekomata, General Chop, Ben, etc. Now, from time to time, you're gonna hear people talk about the old civilization, and when you do, know that they're talking about the time before the Hollows arrived, back when the planet was packed with people and incredible space-age technology. That level of technology is kind of rare and inaccessible these days, as most of the stuff you're gonna see in New Eridu is based on an even older, more analog technology. And that's mostly because analog tech is cheaper, more accessible, and has the added benefit of being resistant to ether corruption, unlike most smart devices of the old civilization. Although you're gonna see a lot of people trying to blend the two types of tech together. And this ability of analog technology to resist ether corruption is kind of a big deal because ether energy comes from the Hollows. And it's also the resource the Founders are using to power the whole city. And it's also the reason for a lot of humanity's problems. We're definitely gonna talk more about the ether and what it can do, but we gotta talk about the Hollows first. So a hollow is basically a disordered spherical dimensional labyrinth where time and space are in a perpetual state of flux. In layman's terms, hollows are basically these big bubbles that are constantly getting jostled around, which, as you can imagine, makes it very difficult to navigate when you're inside. And to make matters worse, you can't exactly see the edges of the hollow when you're inside of one like you can from the outside. So if you were to get stuck in one and try to escape by running in a straight line until you hit a wall or something, you'd be running forever because the hollow would keep changing its layout as you were moving through it. Although I guess this could work in like a really tiny hollow, providing that you could reach the edge before the layout changed, but as hollows get bigger, it gets harder and harder to find your way out. So you're probably better off just staying in one place until someone who actually knows how to navigate these hollows can come and get you. Especially because hollows are also full of monsters, and you wouldn't want to run into one of those, would you? And before you say, well, maybe this hollow doesn't have any monsters. No, all hollows have monsters. In fact, a hollow's size correlates directly to the overall strength or numbers of monsters that it contains. If you somehow manage to get rid of these monsters, which are also known as Ethereals, you can actually force a hollow to shrink by an amount proportional to the number of Ethereals that you destroyed. This is a pretty effective way to prevent hollows from growing too large, and it's also one of the main methods used to ensure that the people of New Eridu can live somewhat safely alongside the hollows, without getting sucked into one. Now, you can probably tell based on all this info that not all hollows are created equal, and therefore there must be different types of hollows. Now, from what I can gather, it seems like hollows end up having a kind of parent-child relationship with each other, meaning larger hollows can spawn smaller hollows, which are called companion or sub-hollows. Companion or sub-hollows seem to kind of come and go. Since they're smaller, that means you could probably clear out most of the Ethereals and make it kind of go away. But larger hollows tend to be more permanent fixtures, so they get their own names. The largest recorded hollow is Hollow Zero, while the next set of large hollows, the 6 original hollows, are called Cretan, Lemnian, Hawara, Persenis, Salav, and Papago. Now again, these might be the largest recorded hollows, but in this world, even the moon has hollows on it. I don't even want to know what a hollow the size of the moon would be like, or what the Ethereals inside would be like. But apart from being chaotic space-time bubble labyrinths full of monsters that you can get trapped inside, hollows also have one other flattering feature. They are filled with ether energy. I've already mentioned that ether can be harvested and then processed to be used as a power source, but what I didn't mention is that prolonged exposure to ether causes corruption, which affects different things in different ways. Organic life, like humans and Therians, as well as sentient smart machinery like cyborgs and Bellabog's construction equipment, can be corrupted to the point where they mutate into Ethereals. So it's really important to pay attention to your ether exposure or increase your resistance to it by wearing special protective armor or taking anti-corruption medication ahead of time. Also, maybe don't eat food that's been exposed to ether. That can also get corrupted, although it will not turn into an ethereal. It's not sentient. But speaking of which, we don't really know a lot about ethereals, but what we do know is that they're violent monsters with limited cognitive capabilities, and as far as I can tell, ethereals can come into an existence in one of two ways, either by manifesting from the ether directly or by the ether corruption of sentient life forms. Fortunately, ethereals exist within the hollows and only within the hollows, as in they cannot leave the hollows. But if you do somehow manage to manually extract one, it will revert into an inactive and fairly harmless crystalline form until it's put back into the hollow. This is its dormant state. It's unclear to me if this dormant ethereal crystal thing radiates ether energy, but it's probably best that normal people keep their distance from ethereals no matter what form they take. Some people are quite sensitive to the effects of ether energy and can grow ill or mutate into an ethereal with very, very, very limited exposure, like within minutes. So it's best to err on the side of caution. That said, some people have a naturally high resistance to the effects of ether exposure, which means that they can stay within the hollows for prolonged periods of time without risk of corruption. And some races, like the Therians, have an innately high tolerance for ether, which allows for even longer exposure times and faster recovery periods, but they also have much faster rates of corruption once they've hit their limit. Like once corrupted, they'll turn into an ethereal faster. Now, folks with high ether resistance usually end up working for or with the Hollow Investigator Association, also known as the HIA. The HIA is a governmental association which takes care of all sorts of general tasks within the hollows, like rescue mission, hollow data collection, and resource recovery. They also handle special missions which involve deploying high-ranked investigators to hunt ethereals and execute tasks related to hollow containment, so like making the hollows shrink. So they're pretty critical to everyday life, and they have a lot of power in the city of New Eridu. But investigators that go into the hollows without HIA approval are known as hollow raiders. You'll hear the term pop up a lot, but apart from the legality of their operating status, they're not too different from regular investigators, except that raiders also seem to go into hollows looking for treasure, which is something I don't think the HIA does, but I could be wrong. But investigators and raiders cannot go into hollows alone. They require the assistance of proxies in order to navigate the hollows safely. And no matter who you are, you can hire a proxy through the online proxy network, which is also known as the Internaut. The role of proxies isn't exactly as easy as I would like it to be, if only because right now we're not super clear on the scope of their responsibilities. And Wise and Belle aren't exactly your typical proxies, so we can't really look to them as perfect examples of proxy responsibilities, you know what I mean? But from what I can gather, the main responsibility of a proxy seems to be to collect hollow data and use it to create a carrot for investigators. Carrots are basically time-sensitive hollow maps that are used to locate a hollow's exit. Now, I know I kind of implied earlier that hollows are these ever-shifting labyrinths that you just can't escape from, but that's only the case if you don't have a carrot. By collecting enough data on a hollow's movements, proxies can create a kind of simulated model that can predict how the hollow will shift, which will then allow them to estimate where the exit will be at any point in time. I kind of like to think of this like we're predicting the weather, right? Based on current data, we can provide a fairly accurate prediction for things like rainfall and temperature, but the farther into the future we try to predict, the less accurate those predictions are. That's kind of why carrots are time sensitive. They can't predict too far into the future. But even with that limitation, carrots are critical to any hollow investigation, so having a good proxy to make you a very reliable carrot is a must. Now, I did mention that our player proxies, Wise and Belle, are rather unique, but I didn't say why. So here's the thing. Instead of doing normal proxy stuff like creating carrots, these siblings use a special computer called the Hollow Deep Dive System, or the HDD, which lets them mind sync with a Bangboo named EOS. So they're basically remote controlling this Bangboo from the safety of their video store, navigating the hollows in real time, and freely communicating with the raiders and investigators that they're working with. Something that should be impossible because you're not supposed to be able to send messages into or out of the hollow. But either way, Bangboos at least are the best avatar for this sort of job because they're exceptionally resistant to ether corruption, having been made for the express purpose of helping to evacuate citizens from dangerous areas during the peak era of the hollow apocalypse. Bangboos are adorable and amazing, and I love them, and they're also a form of sentient machine life, kind of like Billy. And you might be wondering what could make a machine more or less resistant to ether corruption, and the answer is probably certain kinds of metals. At least that's what Billy's character profile data suggests. They never actually say what kind of metals resist to ether, but I'm assuming that they might be heavy metals because ethereals are graded based on strength, and those grades are named after heavy heavy metals. So there might be a meaningful connection between the metals that resist ether and the metallic naming convention of Ethereals. I'm not sure how that would apply to organic life unless people with high ether resistance have heavy metal poisoning, which would actually be really funny because heavy metals build up in the liver, and in alchemy at least, the liver is considered the seat of the soul. Okay, so this is a very tinfoil hat transition into the speculation segment of this video, but while there are a lot of little nods and vague gesturing in the game to suggest a connection between ether, specific metals, and the possession of a soul, I'm not quite prepared to deep dive into it yet, at least not until we get more intel. But until that point, I do want to go into why I think the concept of souls is important, even if I can't quite explain how the souls and the metals link up yet. During your first mission with the Cunning Hares, you're going to be tasked with retrieving a lockbox that contains a very powerful AI named Fairy, who's unique, okay? She's unique. Even in a place like New Eridu, she's pretty unique. She signs a contract with unknown terms and conditions with whichever proxy sibling you choose, which kind of reminds me of making a contract with a demon in exchange for power and knowledge. Anyway, she takes up residency within the HDD and provides auxiliary support for hollow investigations. And all this makes Fairy both a mystery and also very integral to the plot, especially considering how specially designed she is to deal with all things relating to the hollows. But there's one thing about her that stood out to me. Minor out of context spoiler, but in chapter 3, we learn that Fairy is incompatible with any machine-based lifeform that's passed the forbidden fruit test. This seems to be a sort of Turing test, but with a mythological flavor, and it's used to ascertain whether or not an AI has been, quote, endowed with the soul of an individual. So a test to see if it has a soul. And that's a philosophical debate and a half, that's for sure. But if you think about it a little literally, this test is checking for a forbidden fruit, suggesting that the fruit is a soul. As of the time of recording, Zenless Zone 0 seems primarily focused on Japanese, Greek, and Mesopotamian mythology, but I kind of want to focus on just the Mesopotamian. See, New Eridu is named after Eridu, which is the oldest Mesopotamian city in the world and is widely believed to be the original inspiration for the biblical Garden of Eden. You know, the one where Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit from the Tree of Knowledge. That one. Now, one version of this tale features a gardener king who entered the garden of Eridu's patron god Enki and ate a forbidden fruit from the Tree of Life to obtain immortality. And then Enki cursed the gardener in retribution. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to consider the repercussions of Adam and Eve obtaining knowledge from eating forbidden fruit to be a kind of curse as well. Mostly because I'm pretty sure that in the context of Zenless Zone 0, having a soul, or this forbidden fruit, is what enables someone to be cursed in the first place. And what is this curse? Turning into an ethereal via ether corruption. Because while lots of things can get corrupted by ether, only sentient things turn into ethereals. And since ether and ethereals are intricately linked with the hollows, and it makes sense that Fairy is designed to deal with the hollows. See, Fairy's design resembles that of a Nazar amulet, a Turkish talisman used to ward off the evil eye, which is typically associated with things like curses. So if the forbidden fruit is a soul, and those who have a soul can be cursed, then perhaps Fairy was created to protect those who possess souls from this evil eye curse, just like a Nazar amulet. This also kind of implies that she cannot possess her own soul. There are a lot of directions I could launch into with this theory, but in the interest of time and scope, I'm gonna leave that for another video. For now, though, I'd like to close out this video with some speculation on a potential future plot point, which also has a mythological basis. I bet you weren't expecting so much mythology in your post-apocalyptic sci-fi game, huh? Alright, so our Proxy siblings operate under the codename Phaethon, and Phaethon was the son of Helios, a solar deity from Greek mythology. Now, to summarize his most famous myth, Phaethon basically borrowed his father's solar chariot, didn't drive it well, crashed it, and then he died. That's totally not an ominous codename at all. But the coolest part about this reference is that the HDD that Wise and Belle use was made by the Helios Research Institute. And if we go by the myth, then it's quite likely that Wise and Belle are related to this place, meaning that they are, metaphorically at least, the Phaethon or children of the Helios Research Institute, which would make the HDD the chariot that they borrowed. Now, I also believe that the Helios Research Institute was located in the old capital that was swallowed by Hollow Zero about maybe 10 years ago. And I also think that Wise and Belle are looking into some kind of important event that happened there, because they mention wanting to investigate Hollow Zero in order to figure out some mystery event that happened to them when they were younger. Perhaps something related to the Hollows and the HDD went down at the Helios Research Institute that affects them or their family. But there's no way to know for right now, so we're just gonna have to play through more of the story to find out. And I think that's where I'm gonna stop for today. Honestly though, going into this, I did not think there would be this much to talk about yet, but the more I started snooping around in the game, the more interesting things I uncovered. So I am super excited for whatever comes next. All the foreshadowing and references make me happy, just like a little Bangboos. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'm gonna see you in the next video, which will happen after the game officially launches. Unless one of us gets sucked into a hollow before then. Maybe I should get some carrots.